I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon to find a full-scale commercial propane refueling station being erected on what I knew for certain was my property. And my first thought was that someone at the HOA had finally lost their mind completely. My name is Frank Bowman, and I had lived in the Riverside Meadows community in Springfield, Illinois, for exactly 3 years. The development was one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looked vaguely similar, with manicured lawns and strict rules about what color you could paint your mailbox. I had bought the place because the price was right, and the commute to my job at the manufacturing plant was reasonable. The HOA seemed like a minor annoyance at worst when I signed the papers. I should have known better. The woman who ran our HOA was named Patricia Henderson, though everyone called her Patty behind her back, usually followed by less charitable descriptions. She was 52 years old, had blonde hair that she kept in a severe bob cut, and wore pantsuits like they were armor. She drove a white Lexus SUV and had appointed herself the guardian of property values in our neighborhood, which apparently gave her the authority to stick her nose into everyone's business. But this was different. This was not about my trash cans being visible from the street or my grass being a quarter-inch too tall. This was a massive industrial structure with storage tanks, pumps, and what looked like a small building for equipment, all sitting squarely on the corner of my lot. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my truck for a moment, staring at the construction crew working away. There were at least 6 workers, a crane, and several trucks hauling equipment. I could see the distinctive orange and white colors of a propane company logo on some of the materials. I got out of my truck and walked directly toward the foreman, a heavy-set man in a yellow hard hat who was consulting a blueprint. "Excuse me," I said, my voice tight. "What exactly are you building on my property?" The foreman looked up, confused. "Your property?" "This is the community propane station. We were contracted by the HOA. The HOA does not own this land," I said, pointing at the ground. "I do. This is the corner of my lot." He frowned and looked down at his papers. "Sir, we have all the permits and approvals." The HOA board president signed off on everything. We were told this was common area property. "It is not," I said firmly, "and I never gave anyone permission to build anything here." The foreman's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Hold on, let me make a call." I waited while he stepped away and talked on his phone. My heart was pounding. I had my property survey in my home office. I had reviewed it carefully when I bought the house because I wanted to know exactly where my boundaries were. This corner where they were building was definitely within my lot lines. It was close to the street, which probably made it convenient for what they wanted to do, but it was mine. The foreman came back. "I spoke to my boss. He's going to contact the HOA. But we have a schedule to keep, so unless you have documentation proving this is your land, we need to continue working." "Documentation?" I felt my face flush. "You cannot just build on someone's property because you have a schedule. Stop work right now while we sort this out." "I cannot do that without authorization from whoever contracted us," he said. "If you have a problem, you need to take it up with the HOA." I pulled out my phone and called Patty Henderson's number. It went straight to voicemail. I left a terse message explaining the situation and demanding she call me back immediately. Then I called the non-emergency police line. If they were not going to stop, I needed someone official to intervene. The dispatcher told me an officer would come by to take a report, but that it sounded like a civil matter that would need to be resolved through the courts or with the HOA directly. She also noted that if they had permits, the police could not force them to stop work without a court order. I felt my frustration building. The legal system was going to take time, and meanwhile, They were actively building on my land. I went inside and retrieved my property survey from my filing cabinet. The document clearly showed my lot boundaries, and I had marked them myself when I first moved in. The corner where they were building was at least 15 feet inside my property line. When I came back outside with the survey, I approached the foreman again. "Here, this is my property survey, see?" I pointed to the measurements and boundaries. "You are building on my land." He studied the document, his frown deepening. "This does look like it might be an issue. Let me call my boss again." This time the conversation was longer. I could hear raised voices on the other end of the phone. Finally, the foreman hung up. "My boss says we were hired by the HOA, and they provided us with site plans that showed this as common area. If there is a dispute about the property boundaries, that is between you and them. We are going to continue with our work unless we get a legal stop work order." "This is insane," I muttered. A Springfield Police Department cruiser pulled up about 20 minutes later. Officer Martinez was a younger guy, maybe in his early 30s, who listened patiently as I explained the situation and showed him my survey. "Sir, this is a civil property dispute," he confirmed. "The construction company has permits from the city, and they were contracted by the HOA. Unless you can get a restraining order or injunction from a judge, I cannot make them stop. You should contact a lawyer first thing in the morning." "So they can just build whatever they want on my property and I have to wait for the courts?" I asked incredulously. "Unfortunately, yes. If they were threatening you or destroying your home, that would be different. But this is a contractual and property boundary issue. The courts handle those." I thanked Officer Martinez, though I felt anything but grateful. He gave me a case number for my records and left. That night, I barely slept. I could hear the construction equipment running until almost 8 o'clock, and they started again at 7 the next morning. I called in sick to work and spent the early hours researching property lawyers in Springfield. I finally got a call back from Patty Henderson at 9:30. "Mr. Bowman," she said in her clipped, professional voice, "I understand you are upset about the propane station." "Upset?" I said. "You are building on my property without permission. This is not about being upset. This is illegal." "I think you are mistaken about the property boundaries," she said smoothly. "Our records show that corner as common area. The HOA purchased rights to it years ago." "From whom?" I demanded. "I bought this house 3 years ago, and my survey shows it as part of my lot. If someone sold rights to my land, I want to see the documentation." "I will have our lawyer send over the information," she said. "But in the meantime, the station is being built for the benefit of the entire community. Many residents have requested propane service, and this central location serves everyone." "Not on my property," I said. "Stop the construction immediately, or I will take legal action. Mr. Bowman, I suggest you reconsider your attitude. The HOA has considerable resources, and fighting us will be expensive and time-consuming for you. It would be much simpler to accept that this project is happening and move forward." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "I am simply stating facts," she said. "The propane station will provide significant value to the community. Your opposition is noted but will not stop progress." She hung up. I sat in my kitchen, furious and feeling helpless. Then I called the first property lawyer on my list. Her name was Deanne Foster, and she agreed to see me that afternoon. I brought my survey, my purchase documents, and every piece of paper related to my property. She reviewed everything carefully in her small office on South Grand Avenue. "Mr. Bowman, this is very clear," she said after about 30 minutes. "This corner is absolutely within your property boundaries. If the HOA claims they have rights to it, they need to produce the documentation." Do you remember signing anything about easements or common areas when you bought the house? Nothing, I said. I reviewed every document. My realtor even pointed out that I had a slightly larger lot than some of the other houses in the neighborhood. Then they are trespassing and building without your consent, she said. We can file for an emergency injunction to stop the construction, but that will take a few days at minimum. Courts do not move quickly. How much will this cost? I asked. She gave me an estimate that made my stomach drop. Even if I won, I was looking at thousands of dollars in legal fees. I will start preparing the paperwork, she said. But I have to warn you, HOAs can be incredibly stubborn. They have insurance and reserve funds for legal battles. This could drag on. I left her office feeling defeated. The construction was continuing while I tried to navigate a legal system that moved at a glacial pace. By the time I got home, they had erected one of the main propane storage tanks. That evening, I walked around my property with my survey in hand, checking and rechecking the boundaries. There was no question. They were building on my land. I tried calling Patty Henderson again, but she did not answer. I left another message, this time informing her that I had retained a lawyer and that she should expect legal action. The next day was Friday, and I had to go to work. I could not afford to keep taking days off. All day, I worried about what they were doing to my property. When I got home, the construction had progressed even further. They had installed the second storage tank and were working on the pump systems. On Saturday morning, a registered letter arrived from the HOA's lawyer. Inside was a document claiming that the corner of my property had been designated as a common area utility easement in the original development plans from when the neighborhood was first built, 20 years ago. They included a photocopy of what they claimed was the original plat map. I looked at it carefully. The photocopy was poor quality and the markings were hard to read. I compared it to my survey. The boundaries did not match. I scanned everything and emailed it to Deanne Foster, even though it was the weekend. She called me back Sunday afternoon. This plat map they sent is suspicious, she said. The quality is terrible and the markings do not align with your survey. I am going to request the original documents from the county recorder's office on Monday. If they have been altered or if this is fraudulent, that is a serious problem for the HOA. What do I do in the meantime? I asked. Wait, she said. I know it is frustrating, but we need to do this correctly. Once we have the county records, we will have a much stronger case. Monday came and went. Tuesday, the propane station was nearly complete. They had installed lighting, signage, and all the equipment needed for operation. I felt sick every time I looked at it. On Wednesday, Deanne called me. Frank, I have the original plat maps from the county. The corner of your property was never designated as an easement or common area. Your survey is accurate. The document the HOA provided appears to have been altered or is possibly completely fabricated. So what does that mean? I asked. It means they are completely in the wrong and they may have committed fraud, she said. I am filing for an emergency injunction today. I am also recommending we file a police report about the potentially fraudulent documents. Will the injunction stop them? It should once a judge signs it, but that might not be until tomorrow or Friday. They are almost done, I said. By Friday, the station will be operational. I know. I am doing everything I can. I felt trapped. The legal system was designed to protect people, but it moved so slowly that the damage was already done. That night, I stood in my yard, staring at the propane station that now dominated the corner of my property. The lights were on, illuminating the tanks and equipment. It was an eyesore and a safety hazard, and it was on my land without my permission. I thought about what the foreman had said. They had permits. They had been contracted by the HOA. From their perspective, they were just doing a job. But the HOA knew. Patty Henderson knew this was my property, and she had ordered the construction anyway. On Thursday afternoon, Diane called me with good news and bad news. The good news is the judge signed the injunction. Construction must stop immediately. The bad news is the propane company has already filed the station as complete with the city. They are planning to begin operations on Monday. How can they operate if there is an injunction? I asked. The injunction only stops construction. We need a separate order to prevent operation and to force removal. I am working on that, but it requires a full hearing. The earliest date I could get is 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks, I repeated. They will be running propane deliveries and refueling on my property for 2 weeks. I am trying to expedite it, she said, but the court calendar is full. That night, I barely slept again. I kept thinking about the propane station, the trucks that would be coming and going, the liability if something went wrong, the fact that a piece of heavy industrial equipment was sitting on my property against my will. On Friday, I received a letter from the HOA informing all residents that the new community propane station would begin operations on Monday and providing details about how to set up accounts for propane delivery. I called Patty Henderson directly. This time, she answered. "Mr. Bowman," she said before I could speak, "I assume you are calling about the propane station." "You cannot operate it," I said. "There is a court injunction. That station is on my property and you had no right to build it." "Our lawyer reviewed the injunction," she said calmly. "It only prevents further construction. The station is complete. We are within our rights to operate it." "You are not within your rights to use my property," I said, my voice rising. "You built this based on fraudulent documents. You know this is my land." "That is your opinion," she said. "Our records show otherwise. This matter will be settled in court. In the meantime, the community will benefit from the propane service. If you start operations, I will take further action," I said. "Do what you need to do, Mr. Bowman, but the station opens Monday." She hung up. I sat in my kitchen, feeling my frustration turn into something harder. The legal system was not working fast enough. The HOA was proceeding as if they had done nothing wrong. And meanwhile, my property was being used for something I never agreed to. That weekend, I made a decision. If the courts were not going to protect my rights quickly enough, I would protect them myself. On Sunday night, I waited until after midnight. I gathered my tools from the garage: bolt cutters, wrenches, a reciprocating saw, and work gloves. I wore dark clothes and kept my truck parked in my driveway with the bed empty and ready. The propane station was lit by security lights, but the neighborhood was quiet. Everyone was asleep. I walked across my yard to the station and examined the equipment carefully. The tanks themselves were too large and heavy for me to move, but the pumps, hoses, electronics, and smaller components were all bolted into place. I started with the pump assembly. Using my socket wrench, I removed the bolts holding it to the concrete pad. It took about 20 minutes, but I got it free. I carried it to my truck and loaded it into the bed. Next were the hoses and nozzles. Those were easier. I disconnected them and coiled them up. Into the truck they went. I removed the electronic payment kiosk next. It was mounted on a steel pole, and I used the reciprocating saw to cut through the bolts. The grinding noise seemed loud in the quiet night, but no lights came on in the neighboring houses. I wrestled the kiosk free and added it to my truck. I worked steadily for about 3 hours, removing everything that was not permanently fixed in place. The signs, the lighting fixtures, the valves, the meters, the control panel, all of it went into my truck. By 4 in the morning, my truck bed was full of equipment, and the propane station looked like a gutted shell. The tanks remained, but they were useless without the pumps and controls. I drove to a scrap metal yard that I knew opened early, around 6 in the morning. I parked in the lot and waited, dozing in my truck until I saw the owner arrive. His name was Tommy, and I had sold him scrap metal before from various projects. He was a short, stocky man with grease-stained hands and a practical attitude. "Frank," he said when he saw me, "what you got today?" "Propane equipment," I said. "Pumps, hoses, electronics, some steel fixtures." He looked at the load and whistled. "Where did this come from?" "My property," I said. "Someone built it without my permission and I am removing it." He gave me a look that suggested he suspected there was more to the story but decided not to ask. "All right, let me weigh it." We unloaded everything onto his scale. The total came to just over 800 pounds of mixed metal and equipment. "I can give you $400, he said. "Done." He paid me in cash and I drove home as the sun was rising. My truck was empty and the propane station on my property was non-functional. I went inside, took a shower, and made breakfast. Then I waited. The phone calls started around 8 in the morning. First, it was the propane company calling to report vandalism and theft at their equipment. Then it was Patty Henderson screaming into my voicemail about destruction of property. Then it was the Springfield Police Department asking me to come down to the station to answer some questions. I called Deanne Foster first. "They are accusing me of stealing and vandalizing the propane equipment," I told her. "Did you?" she asked carefully. "I removed equipment from my property that was placed there without my permission," I said. "Oh, Frank," she sighed. "That is legally complicated." "How?" I asked. "It is my property. They were trespassing. I removed their equipment." "It is not that simple. Even if they were trespassing, the equipment is still their property. You cannot just take it and sell it. That can be considered theft." "So I am supposed to let them use my land for free?" I asked. "No, but you are supposed to go through the courts," which we were doing. "Too slowly," I said. "I understand your frustration, but you may have just committed a crime. You need to be very careful about what you say to the police." I agreed to meet her at the police station. When I arrived, she was already there, waiting in the lobby. We were shown to an interview room where Detective Sarah Morrison was waiting. Detective Morrison was in her 40s, with short brown hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the complaint filed by the propane company and the HOA. "Mr. Bowman," she said, "you are accused of stealing approximately $15,000 worth of equipment from the propane station located on Riverside Drive. What do you have to say about that?" "The equipment was on my property," I said. "I have a survey proving the propane station was built on my land without my permission." "Do you admit to removing the equipment?" she asked. Deanne put her hand on my arm. "Detective, my client acted to protect his property rights. The HOA built this station without his consent, on land that he owns. He has an injunction from the court stopping further construction. That does not give him the right to steal equipment," Detective Morrison said. "It was on his property," Deanne repeated. "He was removing a trespass." Detective Morrison looked at me. "Did you sell any of the equipment?" I hesitated. Deanne squeezed my arm. "You do not have to answer that," she said. "I sold scrap metal that was removed from my property," I said carefully. "To whom?" Detective Morrison asked. Deanne stood up. "Detective, unless you are charging my client with a crime, we are leaving. He has cooperated and explained his position. If the HOA and the propane company want to pursue this, they can do so in civil court." Detective Morrison looked between us. "The district attorney will review the case." "Do not leave town, Mr. Bowman." We left the station. Outside, Deanne turned to me. "You made this much more complicated," she said. Now they can argue you destroyed evidence and committed theft. The courts do not like self-help remedies. I was protecting my property, I said. I know. But you should have waited. Now we have to fight on two fronts. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. The propane company filed a civil lawsuit against me for the value of the equipment plus damages. The HOA filed their own lawsuit claiming I had interfered with a community improvement project. And the district attorney's office sent me a letter saying they were investigating potential criminal charges. Diane was working overtime. She filed counterclaims against both the HOA and the propane company for trespassing, fraud, and conversion of my property. She also requested an expedited hearing to determine the property boundaries and force removal of the remaining propane tanks. The local news picked up the story. A reporter from the State Journal-Register called me for an interview. I declined, but they ran a story anyway, with quotes from Patty Henderson about how I was a difficult resident who was interfering with community progress. The story got attention online, and suddenly I was getting messages from people across the country who had their own HOA horror stories. Some were supportive. Others thought I was crazy for taking matters into my own hands. The hearing finally happened 3 weeks after I had dismantled the equipment. The courtroom was packed. Patty Henderson was there with the HOA's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit named Gregory Miles. The propane company sent a representative and their lawyer. Deanne and I sat at one table, facing all of them. Judge Ellen Crawford presided. She was an older woman with gray hair and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. "This is a mess," she said after reviewing the case files. "Let me make sure I understand." The HOA built a propane station on land they claimed was a common area. Mr. Bowman claims it is his property. And then Mr. Bowman dismantled the equipment and sold it for scrap. "Is that correct, Your Honor?" Deanne said. "The property boundaries are clear. My client owns the land where the station was built. The HOA used fraudulent or altered documents to claim an easement that does not exist." "Your Honor," Gregory Miles interjected, "the HOA acted in good faith based on records provided by the original developer. Any discrepancy in the property boundaries is an honest mistake, not fraud. An honest mistake that resulted in a commercial facility being built on my client's land without permission," Deanne said. Judge Crawford held up her hand. "I have reviewed the county records. The original plat map clearly shows the corner in question as part of Mr. Bowman's lot. There is no easement or common area designation. The HOA was wrong." Patty Henderson's face went red. Gregory Miles started to speak, but Judge Crawford cut him off. "However," she continued, "that does not give Mr. Bowman the right to dismantle and sell equipment that belonged to others. Even if it was on his property, he should have sought a court order for removal." "Your Honor," Deanne said, "my client was facing immediate harm. The propane station was about to begin operations, creating safety and liability issues on his property. The courts were moving too slowly to protect his rights." Judge Crawford frowned. "I understand the frustration, but we have legal processes for a reason. Mr. Bowman, you put yourself in legal jeopardy by taking matters into your own hands." "Your Honor," I said, speaking for the first time, "what was I supposed to do? They built this thing on my land. They were going to start running trucks and storing flammable gas on my property. I asked them to stop. I went to the police. I hired a lawyer. Nothing was working fast enough." "That is not a legal justification," Judge Crawford said, but her tone was less harsh. "That said, I am sympathetic to your situation. Here is my ruling. The HOA and the propane company are ordered to remove all remaining equipment from Mr. Bowman's property within 30 days. They are responsible for restoring the land to its original condition. Mr. Bowman, you are ordered to compensate the propane company for the equipment you removed and sold. However, given that the equipment should never have been on your property in the first place, the amount is reduced to the scrap value you received, plus 10%. Your Honor, Gregory Miles protested, the equipment was worth $15,000. The equipment was placed on someone else's property without permission, Judge Crawford said sharply. You are lucky I am awarding anything at all. My ruling stands. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Bowman's legal fees to date. This situation was entirely of your making. I felt a surge of relief. It was not a complete victory, but it was something. As for criminal charges, Judge Crawford continued, I am recommending to the district attorney that they be dropped. Mr. Bowman's actions, while not legally proper, were understandable given the circumstances. This is a civil matter that has been resolved. The hearing ended. Deanne and I walked out of the courthouse together. That went better than I expected, she said. You are going to owe the propane company about $440, but the HOA is paying your legal fees, which will be several thousand. What about the HOA? I asked. Are they just going to get away with this? They have to remove the tanks and restore your property, she said. And they are paying your fees. That is not nothing. But I wanted more. I felt like Patty Henderson had deliberately ignored the property boundaries and pushed forward with the project, assuming I would not fight back or that she could bully me into accepting it. Over the next few days, I did some digging. I requested records from the HOA under Illinois law, which required them to provide financial and meeting minutes to homeowners. What I found was interesting. The propane station project had been approved by a vote of the HOA board, which consisted of Patty Henderson and two other people, her neighbor Roger Simpson and her friend Deborah Crane. There had been no general membership vote. The project cost was listed as $75,000, paid from HOA reserve funds. But when I cross-referenced the invoices with public records, the propane company had only billed $50,000. Where did the other $25,000 go? I took my findings to Deanne. She reviewed everything carefully. This looks like embezzlement, she said. If Patty Henderson inflated the project cost and pocketed the difference, that is a crime. What do we do? I asked. We report it to the police, and possibly the state attorney general. HOA fraud is a serious issue in Illinois. I filed a detailed complaint with the Springfield Police Department, providing all the financial documents I had obtained. I also sent a copy to the Illinois Attorney General's office. Detective Morrison was assigned to the case again. She called me in for an interview, and this time the tone was very different. Mr. Bowman, these are serious allegations, she said. If the HOA president embezzled funds, she could face criminal charges. I am just providing the information, I said. The numbers do not add up. Over the next month, the investigation expanded. Detective Morrison subpoenaed financial records from the HOA's bank account. They interviewed the propane company, Roger Simpson, and Deborah Crane, and they brought in a forensic accountant to trace the money. Meanwhile, the propane tanks were removed from my property. The concrete pads were jackhammered up, and the corner of my lot was restored to grass and dirt. It was not perfect, but it was mine again. The story took another turn when the forensic accountant found that Patty Henderson had indeed diverted HOA funds into her personal account. The $25,000 from the propane project was just the beginning. Over the past 3 years, she had embezzled more than $80,000 from the HOA through inflated contractor bills, fake invoices, and unauthorized transfers. Patty Henderson was arrested on a Friday afternoon. I happened to be home and saw the police cars pull up to her house, 3 doors down from mine. She was led out in handcuffs, her face pale and her expression stunned. The white Lexus sat in the driveway, silent witness to her downfall. The neighborhood was in shock. Roger Simpson and Deborah Crane both resigned from the HOA board immediately, claiming they had no knowledge of the embezzlement. An emergency meeting was called, and a new board was elected. The new president was a retired accountant named Helen Price, who promised transparency and proper oversight. The State Journal-Register ran a front-page story about the arrest. The headline read, "HOA President Charged with Embezzlement After Property Dispute." The article detailed the propane station controversy and how the investigation into that had uncovered years of financial fraud. I received calls from several homeowners thanking me for exposing what had been happening. Some admitted they had suspected something was wrong but did not know how to challenge Patty Henderson. Others were just relieved she was gone. Patty Henderson's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming. She eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. In August, she was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus fines and court costs. The propane company quietly settled with the HOA, returning some of the money they had been paid since the project was never completed or operational. They also paid me the reduced amount for the equipment I had dismantled, as ordered by Judge Crawford. As for me, I got my property back, my legal fees covered, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. The corner of my lot where the propane station briefly stood was reseeded with grass, and by fall, you could barely tell anything had been built there. The new HOA board operated very differently from Patty Henderson's regime. They held regular meetings with transparent agendas, published financial reports quarterly, and actually sought input from homeowners before making decisions. It was not perfect, but it was a massive improvement. I stayed in my house in Riverside Meadows. The neighborhood was quieter now, less oppressive. People seemed more relaxed without Patty Henderson patrolling the streets looking for violations. One Saturday afternoon in September, I was mowing my lawn when my neighbor, an older man named Carl who lived across the street, walked over. "Frank," he said, "I just wanted to say thanks. What you did, standing up to the HOA, it took guts. A lot of us were too scared to say anything." "I just wanted to protect my property," I said. "You did more than that," Carl said. "You exposed a thief and made this neighborhood better. So, thank you." We shook hands and he walked back to his house. I finished mowing, feeling better than I had in months. The legal bills were settled by October. The HOA paid Deanne Foster directly for my representation, a total of just over $6,000. I paid the propane company $440 for the scrap value of their equipment. All in all, I came out ahead, especially considering the alternative would have been an industrial propane station operating on my property indefinitely. I also received a small settlement from the HOA's insurance company for my time and aggravation. It was not much, only $2,000, but it felt like an acknowledgement that I had been wronged. Life returned to normal. I went to work at the manufacturing plant, came home, took care of my house, and enjoyed not having to fight with my HOA. The corner of my lot grew back green and healthy, and I planted a small tree there as a reminder of the whole ordeal. In December, I received a letter from the Illinois Attorney General's office thanking me for my cooperation in the investigation and informing me that they were reviewing HOA regulations statewide to prevent similar abuses in the future. Apparently, my case had highlighted weaknesses in how HOAs were overseen and how homeowners could challenge improper actions. It felt good to know that something positive had come from the mess. Christmas came and went. The neighborhood was decorated with lights, and the HOA did not send out any nasty letters about violations or unauthorized decorations. It was peaceful. On New Year's Eve, I stood in my backyard, looking at the corner of my lot where the propane station had briefly existed. The tree I had planted was small but growing. Snow covered the ground, clean and white. I thought about everything that had happened. The shock of coming home to find construction on my land. The frustration of dealing with a system that moved too slowly. The decision to take matters into my own hands, knowing it was risky but feeling like I had no choice. The vindication when the truth came out and Patty Henderson's crimes were exposed. It had been exhausting and stressful, but I would do it again. Sometimes you have to fight for what is yours, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Sometimes standing up to a bully, even one with the backing of an HOA and lawyers and money, is the right thing to do. As the fireworks started going off at midnight, welcoming in the new year, I raised a glass of whiskey to myself in a silent toast. I had fought the HOA and won. My property was mine again. And justice, however long it took, had been served. The new year brought stability. The new HOA board proved to be competent and fair. They focused on maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and staying out of people's personal business. It was what an HOA should be, a helpful organization rather than a tyrannical one. I even volunteered for one of the committees, the landscape committee, to help make decisions about what trees and plants to use in common areas. It felt good to be involved in a positive way rather than constantly fighting. In February, I ran into Detective Morrison at a coffee shop downtown. She recognized me and came over to say hello. "Mr. Bowman," she said, "how have you been?" "Good," I said. "Things have been quiet." "I am glad to hear it," she said. "That was quite a case." I have to admit, when you first came in about the propane station, I thought you were just another angry homeowner. But you were right, and your persistence uncovered something much bigger. "I just wanted my property back," I said. "Well, you did the right thing. And for what it is worth, I am sorry the system did not protect you faster. Sometimes it takes citizens willing to push back to make things work." We talked for a few more minutes and then she left. Her words stayed with me, though. The system was supposed to protect people, but sometimes it failed or moved too slowly. And when that happened, people had to stand up for themselves. By spring, the small tree I had planted on the corner of my lot was budding. I added some flowers around it and a small stone bench. It became my favorite spot to sit in the evenings, watching the neighborhood and enjoying the peace. One evening in April, I was sitting on the bench when a car pulled up. It was Deanne Foster. She got out and walked over. "Frank," she said, "I was in the neighborhood and thought I would stop by." "I hope that is okay, of course," I said. "Have a seat." She sat down on the bench next to me. "I wanted to check on you, make sure everything was settled." "It is," I said. "Everything is back to normal, better than normal, actually." "Good," she said. "You know, in all my years practicing law, I have never had a case quite like yours. Most people would have given up or let the HOA steamroll them. You fought back and you won." "I had good help," I said. "You had courage," she said. "And you were right. That matters." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "Thank you," I said, "for everything. I know I made your job harder by dismantling the equipment, but you stuck with me." "It is my job to advocate for my clients," she said, "even when they make things complicated." She smiled, and I smiled back. She stayed for a little while longer, and we talked about other things, about life and work and the changes in Springfield. Then she left, and I sat alone on my bench as the stars came out. The summer was quiet and uneventful, which was exactly what I wanted. I worked, maintained my house, and enjoyed my property. The grass grew thick and green on the corner lot where the propane station had been. You could not tell anymore that anything had ever been built there. In August, I received an invitation to a neighborhood barbecue organized by the new HOA board. It was held in the community park, and almost everyone attended. There was food, games for kids, and a general feeling of camaraderie that had been missing under Patty Henderson's rule. Helen Price, the new HOA president, gave a short speech thanking everyone for their participation and promising continued transparency and fairness. She specifically mentioned that homeowners should never feel afraid to question decisions or speak up about concerns. I stood in the back, listening, and felt a sense of satisfaction. Things had changed for the better, and I had played a part in that. As the evening wound down, several neighbors came up to me to chat. Some thanked me again for what I had done. Others just wanted to talk about normal things, like sports or the weather or plans for the fall. It felt good to be part of the community in a positive way. That night, lying in bed, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past year. It had started with shock and anger, escalated into a legal battle, and ended with justice and positive change. It had not been easy, and there had been moments when I doubted myself, but I had done the right thing. The corner of my property, once the site of an unwanted propane station, now held a tree, flowers, and a bench. It was a place of peace, a reminder that standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult, is always worth it. I closed my eyes and fell asleep, content with how things had turned out. The following months passed without incident. The neighborhood continued to thrive under the new HOA leadership. The financial records were audited, and it was confirmed that Patty Henderson had stolen more than $80,000 over 3 years. The restitution she was ordered to pay would take years, if she ever managed to pay it all from prison. The propane company moved on and built their station in a proper commercial location with all the correct permits and property rights. They never contacted me again after settling the equipment dispute. I kept in touch with Deanne Foster, occasionally sending her referrals when other homeowners in the area had legal issues. She had become more than just my lawyer. She was a friend who had stood by me when I needed help. In November, almost a year after the propane station had been dismantled, I was contacted by a journalist writing a book about HOA abuses across America. She wanted to include my story as a case study in how homeowners could successfully fight back against overreach and corruption. I agreed, on the condition that my full name would not be used. The story was told accurately, and when the book was published the following year, it helped raise awareness about the problems many people faced with their HOAs. Several states, including Illinois, passed new laws strengthening homeowner rights and increasing oversight of HOA finances. It was not a complete solution, but it was progress. As for me, I continued living in my house in Riverside Meadows. The neighborhood remained peaceful, the HOA stayed reasonable, and my property stayed mine. The tree on the corner grew taller each year, a living symbol of resilience and the importance of standing your ground. Looking back, I would not change what I did. Yes, dismantling the propane station and selling the parts for scrap was legally risky. Yes, it complicated things and could have resulted in criminal charges. But it also forced the issue, exposed the corruption, and ultimately led to justice. Sometimes you have to take risks to protect what is yours. Sometimes the system needs a push to work correctly. And sometimes standing up to those who abuse power, whether it is an HOA president or anyone else, is the only way to make things right. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could face down intimidation and legal threats and come out the other side intact. I learned that there were good people willing to help if you asked. And I learned that justice, while sometimes slow, could still prevail. The corner of my lot, where an unwanted propane station once stood, was now my favorite part of the property. The tree provided shade in the summer. The flowers bloomed in the spring. The bench was a place to sit and reflect. It was a reminder that even when things seem impossible, even when you are facing powerful opponents with more resources and legal backing, you can still win if you are willing to fight for what is right. And that is exactly what I did. I fought, I won, and I reclaimed my property and my peace of mind. The HOA tried to build a propane station on my land without permission. I dismantled it, sold the parts for scrap, and exposed the corruption that had enabled it in the first place. It was not easy, but it was worth it. And I would do it all again if I had to. That is my story. A story about property rights, standing up to bullies, and the importance of fighting for what is yours. A story about an HOA that overstepped, a homeowner who refused to back down, and justice that, in the end, prevailed. My life returned to normal, but I was changed. I was more confident, more aware of my rights, and more willing to stand up when something was wrong. The experience had tested me and proven that I could handle whatever was thrown my way. The neighborhood of Riverside Meadows was also changed. The new HOA board operated with transparency and respect for homeowners. The community was stronger and more united, and everyone knew that abuses of power would not be tolerated. In the end, the propane station that was built on my property without permission became a catalyst for positive change. It exposed corruption, led to criminal charges against Patty Henderson, and resulted in better protections for homeowners across Illinois. My corner lot, once the site of conflict and unwanted construction, was now a place of peace and beauty. The tree grew strong and tall, its roots deep in the soil that was rightfully mine. The flowers bloomed each season, bright and colorful. The bench welcomed me each evening, a place to sit and enjoy the fruits of my perseverance. I had fought the HOA and won. I had dismantled the propane station they built on my property, sold the parts for scrap, and stood firm against their threats and lawsuits. I had uncovered embezzlement, seen justice served, and helped change the system for the better. It was a long journey from that Tuesday afternoon when I came home to find construction on my land. A journey filled with frustration, legal battles, difficult decisions, and ultimately, victory. And now, sitting on my bench under the tree I planted, watching the peaceful neighborhood around me, I knew it had all been worth it. My property was mine. My rights were protected, and the HOA that had once seemed all-powerful had been brought to justice. That was all I had wanted from the beginning. That was what I had fought for, and that was what I had won. The story of the propane station on my property was over, but the lessons remained. Stand up for your rights. Question authority when it oversteps. Fight for what is yours, even when it seems impossible. And never let anyone, not an HOA, not a corporation, not anyone, take what belongs to you without your consent. Those lessons would stay with me for the rest of my life, as solid and permanent as the tree growing on the corner of my lot, as enduring as the justice that had finally been served.